Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of your favorite show, podcast Unfiltered. I remain your host, Bodunri Adebo. I'm so glad that you're here. Before I proceed to introduce the topic of today's episode, I would like to sincerely apologize for being off air for the last 2 to 3 weeks. It was due to some technical issues on my end, as well as travel commitments. But all of that is now behind us, and I can assure you that going forward, I will be coming to you as regularly scheduled. Now, for our discussion today, it's no longer news that um, Nigeria's former President Muhammadu Buhari, died today in London hospital. Our thoughts and prayers to his family and indeed the entire country of Nigeria. Um, President Buhari is a towering figure, both figuratively and literally speaking. And he has played major roles in terms of the politics and development of Nigeria, either as a military head of state, and which he was for a short period in 1983 until he was overthrown in a military coup led by former President Ibrahim Babangida, General Ibrahim Babangida, I should say. And then his foray into politics, he ran for uh, the presidential election in Nigeria in 2003. He was also a candidate in 2007. He was a candidate in 2011. And having run in 2011, he did say publicly that he was not going to run again. But I think that changed because he, along with the incumbent President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and some other political actors and political parties came together to form the All Progressives Congress that has been at the helm of affairs in Nigeria since 2015. So he succeeded in 2015, and of course, he got his term renewed in 2019 until he completed his 2 terms and left office in 2023. So I think if we when we sit down to look at it, Buhari occupies a very unique status in terms of political campaigns and presidential elections in Nigeria, as someone who has been, part of maybe five or so of the series of presidential elections that has taken place in Nigeria: 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, 2019. So five presidential elections that he has been part of. He failed in some, and he, succeeded in the last two. Now, for many, when you're talking about Buhari, uh, uh, people of my own generation, our first uh, encounter or first coming into contact with President Buhari was not as a civilian. For me, and those who belong to my generation or even earlier generation, we came to know Buhari not on the basis of policy. Rather, Buhari was introduced, to us on the basis of being, a disciplinarian, because he was a military leader. So it was not about his campaign promises. It was rather what they laid down, that Nigeria was reading with indiscipline, Nigeria was reading with corruption, and if Nigeria was going to develop, we had to deal with the problem of indiscipline as well as the challenge of corruption. That was their mantra when they came into office in December 1983. And for the 1 year or so that he was in office, himself, Tunde Idiagbo, and the other top military guys that ran the country then, it was war against this indiscipline. That's what we called it. Why? Uh, and that came with very authoritarian, draconian decrees and laws, that restricted fundamental rights and freedom of citizens. My uh, exposure to issues around democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms began to develop, in some little ways then, because you see a military man in the streets, you just have to compose yourself. Those were the days when public transportation system was very, very was lacking. It was bad. That you are at the bus stop and you see people getting into buses through the window, through whatever. I'm speaking from experience here. So they worked to introduce order and discipline. You must queue, and all of that. So that was how some of us got to know the person of President Muhammadu Buhari before the Buhari that shed the military uniform, not voluntarily, I should say, and then took on the civilian garb. Now, so in having this conversation, I think I've talked about Buhari as the soldier turned the soldier, but now let's now look at the soldier turned statesman, or the soldier turned civilian. As I indicated, Buhari ran in series of elections until he got into he succeeded in 2015. And when he succeeded against the background of the legacy that he is built for himself during his short time stay in office in 1983 through 1984, that he introduced the war against indiscipline, war against corruption. And Nigeria was faced with the problem of insecurity as well as the problem of, corruption when he came back into office in 2015. So it came with a groundswell of public, goodwill throughout the series of elections that Buhari ran and lost. There was never a time that he failed to deliver anything less than 12 million votes, even though those 12 million votes were largely from the northwestern part of the country, some parts of the middle belt, and some part of the northeast. It just could not cut through in the south until some political realignments that eventually, made him succeed to emerge as president. So that's the history that brought President Buhari into office. Now, but the question many are asking is that though he positioned himself as the man who could clean up the mess of Nigeria, did he really succeed? And I would like to hear from you, the audience. Would you would you describe President Buhari as a successful anti-corruption crusader? Did he succeed in cleaning up the mess in Nigeria? Because the war on corruption seems to have defined much of his first term. We know he introduced um, the Treasury single account system. He also, which was considered a big win. That's the TSA was considered a big win in terms of how it was rolled out and how it helped to tighten financial leakages. But question still remained, about transparency and selectivity in terms of prosecution. So I would like to hear from you. How would you describe Buhari's anti-corruption legacy in Nigeria? Was it just much of propaganda, or really there are things that we can say will endure over time? Now, the other thing that I I will we can reflect on, okay, is also in terms of how Buhari handled the security situation in Nigeria. As I mentioned earlier, he came in at the height of the Boko Haram crisis, for which the previous government of Goodluck Ebele, President Ebele, Goodluck Jonathan was criticized for not being decisive, for not having the right military strategy to combat. So Buhari came on as a retired general who in the past had dealt with some that had helped to quell insurgency in the northeastern part of Nigeria back in the 80s, and we thought that was going to be a major factor, that as a former general, it will marshal the troops and then deal decisively with Boko Haram. And that was his greatest promise. But despite the best of his efforts, uh, Nigeria still continues to struggle, with issues of national security. Boko Haram, till this moment, remains active despite tactical gains. And on top of the Boko Haram crisis is that we also have, you know, issues with banditry, kidnapping, the farmer herders clashes, that has surged in the north and the middle belt. And indeed, it has also spread even to some parts of the south, you know. So Buhari's his critics often, lament that he was muted in his responses to some of these national insecurity issues, particularly the farmer herders clashes, because the herders are largely Fulani pastoralists, which is the ethnic group that President Buhari comes from, and many accuse him for not being decisive when issues around farmer elder clashes are being come up in the country. And of course, the other point that also taints or Buhari's legacy is the NSAS protest in 2021, I think, if I get my date correct, and how uh, soldiers were alleged to have, killed protesters at the Lekki toll gates in Lagos. That remained a blight, on the Buhari presidency up until this moment. So the question is, Buhari was accused of being silent. And so is silence really a strategy, or it is a symptom of detachment. Because it got to a point in the second term of the Buhari presidency that people, Nigerians, felt that it was totally detached from, the day-to-day issues of governance in the country. So, do you see silence on his part as a strategy for managing the country, or it was just a symptom of, detachment? Now, as I round up this, I think it's also important that we say where Buhari's government also uh, made some, positive impact. I think on the economic front, Buhari's presidency protected protectionism. I think if we say make some countries great again, he seems to have also bought into that idea. And then he was very ambitious in terms of, launching huge infrastructure plans as well as a social investment program, the famous Empower scheme, and then the school feeding programs that seems to have, reached millions of people, though politics also came in and, messed up that laudable initiative. And then the depreciation, uh, I think on the criticism side really is uh, the depreciation of the naira and how so much forex was used to shore up the naira when against the orthodox economic principles that they should let the market forces determine the real value of the naira, and how much went into the petroleum subsidy regime in Nigeria, which he promised that he was going to deal with, but he never dealt with. Corruption that that colored that particular subsidy regime payment. Of course, the government was bleeding resources because so much was being used to subsidize importation of petroleum products into the country. And then there is also the question of the defense of the naira and how how foreign the shortage of foreign exchange in the country and how the naira continued to depreciate, uh, and the purchasing power of uh, of the naira continued to be a challenge, and there was so much arbitrage that was going on in that regard. And some now, in closing, I would say that as we mark the end of Buhari's chapter in Nigeria's political book, we should remember that leadership isn't just about tenure, it's about impact. It is the questions citizens continue to ask long after the president exit the stage. So I ask you, what will you remember most about President Muhammadu Buhari? Was his presidency defined by intention, inertia, or inevitability? And of course, how should we honor the complexities of leadership, without forgetting the cost, to the ordinary Nigerians? So this is our show for today. I thank you for watching along and for listening. Cast Unfiltered. We'd love to hear from you. Please drop a comment in the comment section below, and let's continue to interrogate issues around power, issues around politics, issues around policy, as well as participation. Until then, keep asking, keep thinking, and stay engaged. Bye bye.